And we can start. So thank you very much to everyone for being here. And to Julia Marinaccio, Dr. Julia Marinaccio from Bergen University for being here and taking the time to present research entitled The Taiwanese Emigrant Electorate, Studying Transnational Political Mobilization in the Context of Cross-Strait Relation, which is basically one of the topics we have identified for the summer edition of the Taiwan Colloquium. So Dr. Marinaccio is a postdoctoral fellow at the Department of Foreign Languages of the University of Bergen. And her research is at the intersection of comparative politics and political theory, and she focuses more precisely on the environmental governance and the political transnationalism, both in China and in Taiwan. And she has been living for several years in Taiwan, conducting fieldwork, and she worked also at the University of Vienna at the Freie Universität of Berlin. And in 2020, she was nominated for a postdoc fellowship at the Institute of Political Science of Academia Sinica, but she had to withdraw from during the pandemic. So she's in Bergen, and we hope to see her very soon physically. And in any case, she will also be part of the Young Scholar Workshop this year. So if we are all ready, I think that Julia, the screen is for you.
Thank you, Beatrice, for the very nice introduction. I'm very happy that I can present my ongoing research project today. I'm just trying to make the presentation go. Yes. Can you see the full screen, or do I have to change? Okay, perfect. Okay, so today's presentation, I thought I would start out with telling you a little bit on how it relates to my new research project that I call Voices from the Taiwanese Emigrant Voters, the unresolved issue of equal suffrage in contemporary Taiwan. And then I will, after introducing a little bit on this topic, which is background information, I will then focus on transnational electoral mobilization, on the actors, processes, and practices. And I will do so by presenting my findings on a case study that I conducted in Austria, in Austria's Taiwanese community. And then, like, from a comparative perspective to China, like focusing then on studying transnational political mobilization in the context of cross-strait relations, which, as you will see, will be quite different in terms of actors and processes, and maybe not necessarily practices, but in terms of actors, there's a great difference to Austria. Okay, so what is my my project about? Basically, in my project, I will focus on this. Like, I came up with the idea because I was quite amazed by Taiwanese residing abroad and going back to Taiwan, flying back to Taiwan, like spending a lot of money and time to exercise their right to vote. And then when I started looking into this matter, I found, okay, there isn't any literature on that. And so I did some background research and like look into the theory, and then I came up with my questions, which I will try to answer in the course of this research project. Why does Taiwan still not have an external voting system? So why can Taiwanese not vote from abroad, like postal voting or any other voting? Why do they have to go back? Which solutions have other countries in East Asia found for their immigrant electorates? How do Taiwanese politicians and immigrant voters deal with this absence of an external voting system? And to what degree is this comparable to the experience of other immigrant populations from democratic countries? who face similar constraints. For example, I heard that Israel doesn't have an external voting system, which could be a case study as well. Which political party, and finally, which political parties and candidates do the Taiwanese immigrant electorate vote for? What is their position on introducing an external voting system, and which factors promote or keep them from putting pressure on Taiwanese authorities to lower voting costs? So this is actually what my big project is about, which will last for the next couple of years, 3 or 4 years. To give you a little bit more of background information, as I already said, Taiwan doesn't have an absentee voting system. So according to the presidential election and Recall Act and the Referendum Act, voters must cast their ballots in the designated polling stations of the registered domiciles in Taiwan on election day, which means that people, whether they live abroad or whether they live also in Taiwan in a different place, like outside their registered domiciles, they still have to travel back to their counties, to their county seats to cast the ballots. This obviously incurs high voting costs for everybody, like also in Taiwan, because also their tickets can cost a lot of money, but not comparable to what immigrant Taiwanese pay abroad. It creates inequalities in exercising the right to vote. It can negatively affect voter turnout. This is a huge discussion whether, because Taiwan has already a quite high voter turnout. The last elections were more than 77%. So whether an absentee voting system would further increase that or not. But it also raises question about the government's political legitimacy, like from a normative point of view then. How big is the share of absentee voters, and whom does it actually involve? So according to a survey by the Ministry of Interior in 2010, the total share of absentee voters rose to 20.74%. In a more recent estimate by Professor Wu Chung-Li, who is a very accomplished and renowned scholar at the Academia Sinica, he said that the share of absentee voters rises to 28 to 32%. So quite a high share. Whom does it involve? Students who study abroad, graduates who remain in these countries to work, and in general, immigrants from Taiwan, like those who emigrated and then stayed in the country. Then workers and employees dispatched abroad, officials who work in representative offices or international aid workers, Taiwanese investors, business owners, the so-called Taishang, and managing personnel of Taiwanese companies in China and Southeast Asia, tourists traveling abroad for leisure during the holidays or during that time, but also people who go abroad for short-term study, research stays, and now also because I said absentee voters does not only include those who are abroad, but also people inside the country. So people who work and study mainly in the Greater Taipei area with tight family connections in the middle and southern regions, which basically means that they are still registered in the south, in the middle or in the southern regions. But also quite an amount of military and police personnel that is in service on election day. And as you see, apart from the military and people who work in the Greater Taipei area, there is quite most of the others absentee voters live abroad. And if we calculate now, how high this share is, there aren't any real official data on this. What I can draw on is data about overseas Taiwanese that is collected by the Overseas Community Affairs Council, which is a cabinet level authority that's concerned with all kinds of overseas affairs like education of overseas Taiwanese and so on. And according to the council, those who are referred to as overseas Taiwanese, the 海外台湾侨民, they possess a permanent household registration in Taiwan and are thus entitled to citizen rights, including access to healthcare, education in Taiwan, and the right to vote in home elections. So, and now the big question is how high, what's the share of these voters? And if we take these estimations, like if we take the statistics on overseas Taiwanese, then the share of the immigrant electorate rises to more or less 10% of the total voting population. This is an estimate. If we take the 2.5 millions and calculate it from the total voting population, we come to 12–13%. But overseas Taiwanese also include people like who are not yet eligible for voting. So it's more or less 10% of the total population. So it's not the small amount of people who are actually then who cannot exercise their vote from abroad, where they're residing at the moment during the elections. So why does Taiwan still not have an external voting system? I still don't know it why. So this is part of the research project. So I don't have a final answer, but it is an enduring political controversy that goes back to 1996. So actually, when the Presidential Election Act was introduced, so that Taiwanese could, for the first time, could vote their president, like directly vote for the president. And discussions about an external voting system started back at that time. And debates are more or less recurring, like they become stronger, obviously during election campaigns. But there have been some like real efforts to introduce an absentee voting system. For example, the last one, like bigger wave of efforts to implement an absentee voting system was during Ma Ying-jeou's tenure between 2008 to 2012. And the debate basically was about what kind of absentee voting system. So if I go back one slide, you see an absentee voting system. There is different ways of how to implement it. You could do postal voting. You could do proxy voting, so that you allow somebody for somebody else to cast your ballot. You could do early voting. There are electronic means. So there are different means of how you could actually implement it. And the form of absentee voting that would be feasible was obviously a very central discussion. Most controversial was postal voting, for obvious reasons regarding security and like in the context of cross-strait relations, because there is this like because of the possibility that postal votes could be like they could get lost, they could get extracted or whatever. There was one way, one form of absentee voting that was like favored, that was most favored, is the transfer of constituencies, so that you're still registered in your domicile, but for the elections you can apply for a temporal transfer of constituency. And this was then the most favored, which is applicable to both or it would be in theory applicable to both absentee voters in Taiwan, but also those abroad. Another topic the debate revolved around was like obviously the technical feasibility, but also its added value to Taiwan's democracy, since, as I already mentioned, Taiwan has already had quite high voter turnout. So why add something when people are willing to go back and people are very much committed? But another like aspect that was regularly raised was the public trust in an absentee voting system, and so that people, the broader public has to trust the system in order to then actually use it, and also like to accept the results, the election results, and not then turn against it and say, okay, but because we have postal voting and this was all manipulated. The argument of public trust was put forward mostly by the DPP, which opposed the introduction of an external voting system, both for Taiwanese who live abroad and also Taiwanese within the country, and the KMT strongly supported an introduction. Like the nudge of the debate, or if, some people or some observers say that the real issue is not about what form of absentee voting, the technical feasibility or the added value, but it's more a political issue. And the big question is the electoral advantage. So whom would it bring actual votes? And again, to cite this professor from the expert from the Academia Sinica, who's very much has been very much involved in all these, like in public hearings on drafts, on legislation drafts, and so on. He says that both parties would benefit. To give you the context, the DPP opposes an external voting system, especially for Taiwanese abroad, because they fear if Taiwanese, the Taishang who live in China, and also the military personnel, which is people working for the military and for the police, they are more like their political preferences are more towards the KMT, and they fear that like with an external voting system, the KMT would gain votes. But Wu Chongli points out that since there is an exodus from the southern provinces to the north in the Greater Taipei area, those people, like those votes, would then go to the DPP. So in the end, both parties would benefit. And since there aren't any polls on how absentee voters actually cast their votes, cast their ballots, we don't know whether like an absentee voting system would confirm elections or would change elections. And that's the big issue. That's where it becomes political. Okay, so more recent efforts, obviously the efforts in 2012 didn't bring any results, but there's been a slight shift within the DPP on its position regarding the implementation of an absentee voting system. But still, most legislators like confronted are skeptical and refuse the introduction of an absentee voting system, especially one which would include voters residing abroad. There's been like progress recently. The Central Election Commission had submitted a draft bill that allows voters living in Taiwan to cast their ballots in referendums outside the electoral districts to the Executive Yuan. And like the last news I read and I had access to, where from December, where legislators said, legislators from the legislative yuan said that it wasn't clear whether it would pass to be then, that it could be like in effect already in August 28 for the next referendum. But I'm still trying to get to find out whether it's gone through or not. This is still open. So that's the recent efforts in implementing an absentee voting system. But what is kind of striking is that while there is kind of a consensus within the population that the introduction of an absentee voting system would be important or is important, only 15% wish the absentee voting system to be applied to Taiwanese residing abroad. So there's also consensus that the absentee voting system should remain on the island and its surrounding islands. But the problem with these, with the survey that brought these results, is that it's not clear to what degree this reflects opinions of immigrant voters, because there aren't any surveys, neither polls on immigrant voters. And I did a survey in Austria last year. It's not representative, but still I have some results. And according to my respondents, 83% favored introducing a postal or any other absentee voting system. So this is the situation. A few other results from like electoral participation of immigrant votes. There are few results, but still there are. So we know for a fact that Taiwanese politicians habitually solicit support from overseas Taiwanese immigrants, asking them to return to Taiwan to vote. In Taiwan, this is called fanxiang toupiao. And especially during the last elections, there was a considerable increase in the registration of immigrant voters who had not registered domiciles in Taiwan, but wanted to have one in order to vote. But still, these people had to go to Taiwan, to fly to Taiwan to actually then exercise their right. Also, according to my survey, 38% of my respondents traveled to Taiwan. At the beginning, I thought, well, that's not that much. And then when I talked to other people, there was like, what, 38%? And given the fact that that the average cost of travel was 1,500 euros per person, it's still impressive. And the reasons for the rest of the 62% who stayed in Austria, most people said the reason why they could not go back to Taiwan to participate in the election were job-related reasons, so they couldn't get any vacation, or family obligations were also a reason. But only 9% didn't go back because they weren't interested and thought that political electoral participation was not important. So as you see, there is like a strong democratic commitment, and also like a willingness to spend a lot of time and money to exercise one's civil rights. Which brings me to the question of, because obviously these voters don't have to be mobilized in a way. And that's why I looked then into how this transnational mobilization actually takes place, who are the actors and the processes, but also the practices. So how get voters abroad motivated to vote? And now I have to put in a little bit of theory. In my project, I draw on the framework of political transnationalism, and basically what like to grasp the concept of the broader concept of political transnationalism is that it builds on this contradiction that while states are territorially bounded and bounded political entities, people and information and money spans by social networks and institutions and fields across these territorial borders. So we have bounded political entities on the one hand that stay in one territory, but we have a lot of movements beyond the territories back and forth. And if we want to define what political participation is, and we draw on a very classic definition by Milbrath and Maiden, it's the action of private citizens by which they seek to influence or support government politics. Oh, there are people working here. I'm sorry. Okay, so if we then draw on this very conservative, not conservative, but traditional definition of political participation and put it into a migrant context, then and against this framework of political transnationalism, then we have a lot of new questions to ask. For example, which political entity is the political participation oriented? So there are various options, right? Like the home country, the country of residence, but also like the international organizations. For example, would be three arenas to direct your political activities. And while this political participation is oriented maybe only to one entity, it still involves multi-level processes, structures, and actors that cross territorial borders. And the question I'm trying to tackle today within this framework and with these definitions is how the polity of the receiving country informs these practices. So yes, how the polity informs that. So that's very short on a theoretical level, still a little bit of theoretical. So how does the receiving policy actually affect these practices? To understand voter mobilization, we have to understand the assumption on which voter mobilization actually builds on. And it builds on the assumption that voting is a social act and also a social norm that so people can be convinced or pressured to comply with this social norm. And this is why a lot of people think that, including political parties, that voter mobilization is actually effective. There is a little bit of literature on voter mobilization in migrant communities. And what this literature says is that high geographical concentration and organizational density facilitates mobilization, both the one directly exerted by parties, but also indirect mobilization from peers. Yes, so that's based on this theoretical understanding, I then looked into the Austrian community to give you a rough idea about the Taiwanese community in Austria, to give you a rough idea about what the Taiwanese community in Austria looks like. there aren't any exact numbers, but like they oscillate between 1,597, which would be the official numbers collected by the Austrian authorities, but also to 3,000 Taiwanese overseas residing in Austria, which would be the estimate of the local Taiwan representative office. The exact number of Taiwanese with voter eligibility who reside in Austria is unknown. In terms of socio-demographic characteristics, we have a community that is very much concentrated in Vienna. 2/3 of them live in Vienna, and with a very high degree of education. So 90% of them have at least a bachelor degree, and 88 work or study, study and work, and 45% have lived in Austria less than 1 year, than 5 years, which means that almost half of the community are students in Austria. So potential immigrants who will go back to Taiwan, and potential immigrants that would also benefit strongly from an external voting system, because it is presumed that they might have an interest in like influencing politics in their home country, because it does affect them directly. Okay, so the Taiwanese community in Austria is, as I said, it's densely organized. We have 3 types of organizations, which would be overseas compatriot associations, then kind of service-oriented associations, like those like more involved into women issues, or Taiwanese students, or the Taishang Hui, the Taiwanese entrepreneurs. And we also have 2 Taiwanese schools that provide cultural and language education to the progeny of Taiwanese immigrants, but also to the wider, to the broader Chinese community. What came out in my research is that the organizational landscape has been very much affected and shaped by Taiwanese identity politics. So we have if you look at the overseas compatriot associations, basically the 2 most important the biggest are the Association of Taiwanese in Austria and the Chinese Association in Austria. And the 2 of them have very different, follow different identity politics. And you can see it already from the name, who's more in the green camp and who's more in the inclines more towards the blue camp. So the Chinese Association in Austria is more like an Chinese ethnicity, promotes or advocates Chinese ethnicity-based identity, favoring the blue camp, and the Association of Taiwanese in Austria is more advocates a Taiwan-based identity, and is therefore also much more a proponent of the green camp. So how did transnational mobilization actually worked out? In Austria, since the community is quite small, there weren't any Taiwanese politicians during the election campaign who visited the community. Much to the contrary to, for example, in the US or in Southeast Asia, where the wife of the KMT's candidate Han Kuo-yu toured to gather the support of the local overseas communities. But Southeast Asia and United States have really high numbers. There are hundreds of thousands Taiwanese immigrants And I think in the US it's 1.28 million. No, just let me have a look. That I don't want to give you. Yeah, 1.28 million who live in the US. Okay, so you see in Europe in general there are fewer Taiwanese. Politicians, since like direct mobilization of is quite costly, Taiwanese politicians would rather go to places with a high number of Taiwanese immigrants rather than Austria. But still, political organizations close to the parties, especially close to the DPP, they try to mobilize those like especially young voters. Beatrice, how much time do I have left?
Go ahead.
No, I'm just asking whether I can play the video or not.
I think if we still have more than half an hour, so I think that if the video is not long, we can try. I think we are all curious.
Okay, then I will show, because it's a really nice video. Okay.
Yeah.
And it's short, and I don't have to play all it. Okay.
Excellent.
So this video was actually originated in Taiwan and went over a lot of networks over the federation of the European Federation of Taiwanese Associations that organized actually you will see the inputs, the individual inputs of the people who contributed to the video, and then again spread the video on their platforms. I cannot make it grand, but big.
我是张文瑞，我来法国29年，我在法国当律师。
一位侯任，我在南法的 Bergen， 西班牙的边界。
我是西元，我在瑞士。
我现在所在的地方是欧盟以及欧洲议会在布鲁塞尔的总部。
我是善玉，在捷克布拉格。
我是孟璇，我在维也纳工作。
我是林芳瑜，我在奥地利。
我们在苏格兰。
我是王建慧，现在在巴黎念比较文学博士班。这次的选举决定的不只有台湾的未来，更是向国际传递的重要讯息。
我1997年出生，同年香港政权转移中国，但如今我每天看到香港的新闻，都觉得很难过。
这个生于解除暴政那年，长在自由民主台湾的人，自由的代价不可被遗忘。
看到在香港街头抗争的年轻人们，为了他们的真普选，为他们的基本人权，为了防卫他们的家园被侵害，他们都很勇敢上街头。1月11号，希望大家能够一起用选票守护我们的国家。
投台湾一票，咱的台湾的未来决定在咱每一个人的手中。
让世界上看见台湾人的选择。2020，我会回台湾投票。
2020 1月11号，为了孩子们回台湾投票。
1月11，咱做伙回去投票。2020，我们会回去投票。
Yeah, so you see, the video is quite like the DPP youth organization, they connected with these overseas organizations that then posted an announcement. So please bring your individuals' contributions that were like framed in this. Say that if you go back to Taiwan, tell your motivation, and then end your video with the phrase "Erling Nian." 我回台湾投票，你呢? And so after they collected all these inputs, they made these videos, and there are like 6 editions in different regions in the world, also in Taiwan. This was then again like disseminated over these platforms. So especially in mobilizing youth, the associations used a lot of online, like social media, but also the internet. Whereas the more older cohorts, They were mobilized in traditional like rallying, like excursions that the other association, the Chinese association in Austria, organized for them. One went, I know from one bus trip, and then everything was about elections, and people were like, yeah, you have to go back and vote. And so there was a lot of indirect, also indirect voter mobilization going on in the Austrian community. Yes, and also what's transnational, like for example, using Facebook and and Line. There were, for example, activists in Germany that said, okay, we want to go back to Taiwan to vote. We could buy a plane ticket together, just sign up. So they were trying to get enough people to get a better price for it, like a group ticket. And this was also like shared on platforms. So if we summarize what's been going on in Austria, is that there were like Taiwanese political organizations kind of used overseas organizations as entry points to actually mobilize voters, but also individuals use these platforms for mobilizing people, like individual members, not who are not like party members or whatever, use these associations as platforms. What's in Austria, obviously the Austrian state was not involved at all, which was much to the contrary during Erdogan's mobilization of the Turkish migrants in 2015, where the Austrian state actually then was involved and tried to undermine, like they had a very strong position on that it's not okay that Erdogan mobilizes voters in Austria and also in Germany. Processes, online, offline mobilization, but also mostly due to the fact, direct online mobilization due to the fact that the community is very small. Practices like videos on social media, but also alternative expressions of political support, like collection of signature lists that were then sent to the Overseas Council or to Taiwanese media. I heard from people who have donated money, but it wasn't confirmed by anybody. And yes, and what the transnationality of all these practices and processes is that actors were involved, like in Taiwan, in Germany, in Austria, and they kind of connected with the help of information, communication, technology, information, and also election appeals transcended to territorial borders. And now, shortly, I know I've already stretched a lot of my time. I'm very sorry. Now we come to mobilization in the context of cross-strait relations. I'm very short because I've started looking into it only recently. So again, we come back to the question, how does the polity of the receiving country inform political practices of migrants, especially in election-related political participation or political activities. And there, like, for example, part of these process is the question what role the Taizhang, the Taiwanese investors and entrepreneurs in China play. So usually there's a lot of discussion going on in Taiwan. For example, one was that the Taiwan Merchants Association in Shenzhen like subsidized its members with discounts for plane tickets. I have to go back to Taiwan and vote, obviously, for the KMT. And also another notice was that in September, the Association of Taiwan Investment Enterprises on the mainland requested discounts on airfares, and mainland airfares responded immediately. In Austria, I asked whether the two Taiwanese airlines had discounted airfares during the time of the election. They said that they did not have them, and it's also prohibited. So they couldn't, because they're not supposed to interfere in these things. Another like, and similar notices that overseas that the merchants associations in Taiwan actually engaged in a lot of indirect mobilization of Taiwanese living on the mainland and kind of subsidizing them going back to Taiwan. What is also striking is that obviously, or not striking, but obviously the Chinese state has had an interest, and the Chinese state also like kind of did usual propaganda. Like one of these videos is like that Taiwanese could like kind of promoting unification, and they placed this promotion of unification during the election campaign. So it was very much related to a vote for a party that's more China friendly and that's more inclined to unification. So I started thinking about who would be the actors involved in mobilization, and I found this like if we divide them in Taiwanese actors in China and Chinese actors in China and Taiwanese actors in Taiwan and Chinese actors in Taiwan, we can come up with a lot of like different actors, like associations, media, state authorities, activists, entrepreneur, or corporate actors, and so on. So I'm sorry. To finally conclude, my presentation is if we analyze voter mobilization, obviously the actors, processes, and practices are shaped by different political and cultural contexts in which the emigrant voters reside. So the polity of the receiving country is important. The factors that affect practices can also, and also the range of action of transnational voter mobilization is very much linked to size and composition of Taiwanese migrant community, but also leadership. Not all leaders of associations actually engage in political activities. There's a lot of individual agency. The polity in terms of authorities of the receiving countries, whether they ignore, facilitate, or impede transnational mobilization, impede in sense of either for one or the other party. So big question, was there voter mobilization for the Green Camp somewhere in China? Because there are a lot of students there. The media, whether there's overseas media, but also state media, like or national media, whether they report on it or not, can affect it. And this shapes opportunities, but also obstacles. In Taiwan, there's definitely a high extent of scrutiny in the context of voter mobilization in the context of cross-strait relations than it would be the case in Austria. Yeah, thank you for your patience.
No, thank you to you, Julia. It was really fascinating, and I mean, it's